Welcome to the Egyptian collection at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And welcome to A&E's special presentation, The Face of Tutankhamun. It's November 1922. The news of the day is fairly routine stuff. A power struggle in Russia, a civil war in China, here at home the impeachment of a governor, routine stuff. What the world needs is something exciting, something to lift it out of the post-war gloom from World War I. And the Sunday after Thanksgiving, it happens. From that strange, mysterious land of Egypt comes a report of an amazing treasure hunt that has struck gold. After years of searching, an Egyptologist named Howard Carter has discovered the almost completely intact tomb of the boy king Tutankhamun. Untouched for 33 centuries, filled with breathtaking treasures crafted more than 1,000 years before Christ. This is the greatest archaeological discovery of all time. Tonight we begin the story of the search that led to that discovery and the man who made it possible, Howard Carter. It is a tale packed with adventure, suspense, and more than a few chills. Our storyteller is the British historian, Professor Christopher Frayling. Join us as A&E presents The Face of Tutankhamun.
From the discovery of the fantastic burial place of Tutankhamun to a sparsely attended funeral in South London, the career of archaeologist Howard Carter was one of stark contrasts, between high adventure and deep disappointment, between fame and neglect, a blessing and a curse. The world was quite literally amazed by Howard Carter's discovery in November 1922 of the almost intact tomb of a young pharaoh of New Kingdom Egypt who died in about 1323 BC. The press competed for the latest exciting news of the discovery. Tourists flocked to the Valley of the Kings in the Theban hills to catch a glimpse of strange treasures which had lain undisturbed for well over 3,000 years. In Europe and America, the new mass media created a new craze, Tutmania, which seemed to be everywhere. In 1922, this was the most powerful peacetime craze the world had ever seen. Today, stimulated by a series of multi-million-dollar exhibitions of the contents of Tutankhamun's tomb, which toured the globe in the 1960s and 70s, millions of visitors come to the tomb itself and to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where the original discoveries unearthed by Howard Carter and his team, the jewelry, the funerary equipment, in short, the gold, are displayed complete and intact.
Y pueden ver aquí el trabajo del vestido con la falda o el adorno dorado.
You know, this is the small king, 18 years old, second one in the scene. So we're going to see everything belongs to the government.
More than anything else, they come to stare at the famous face of Tutankhamun. But few would recognize the face of the man whose name was all over the headlines in the 1920s, but who died lonely and embittered in 1939.
What sort of a
person was Howard Carter, the man who found and dug up the priceless treasures of Tutankhamun. His life story and the story of the buried treasure in the Valley of the Kings contains some of the fiercest contradictions in modern archaeology, as well as some of the weirdest myths and legends. The Egypt of the 1890s, when Carter first started working there, was a vast treasure house of antiquities, to be visited almost at will by Western archaeologists, travelers fascinated by the romance and fantasy of the East, and administrators and soldiers supporting the veiled protectorate exercised by the British. Egyptologists could now understand the written language of the ancients, and archaeology was in the process of becoming more organized as Western science encountered Eastern splendor. This was the atmosphere and the world to which the young Howard Carter would be drawn. Howard Carter was born in London off the Old Brompton Road, Kensington, on the 9th of May 1874, but it was here in the small market town of Swaffham in northwest Norfolk that he spent his childhood. Didlington Hall, home of the celebrated Amherst family, was a 10-mile walk from Swaffham. And the young Howard Carter spent a lot of time here, drawing in the garden and listening to stories about ancient Egypt and its archaeology. For the Amhersts, who took Howard under their wing, were early and influential members of the Egypt Exploration Fund. Didlington Hall housed the greatest private collection of Egyptian objects in Britain. To Howard Carter, this was all pure magic, and as he put it, it gave him a premature longing for that particular country and his first experience of drawing Egyptian objects. It was his artistic talents which secured for him at the age of 17 a job in Egypt as a draftsman and tracer.
Stiff and dirty, after a long journey, we crossed over the river to the east bank in an antiquated native ferry boat. There, we climbed up to the rock terrace of the escarpment, where the ancient tombs are situated.
His first posting for the Exploration Fund was 150 miles up the Nile from Cairo to the Middle Kingdom rock tombs of Beni Hassan. The tombs contained magnificent paintings, memorials and inscriptions which covered about 12,000 square feet of wall space. Carter was the youngest member of a survey team whose function it was accurately to trace and record the wall decorations. Also, to make watercolor drawings of the most important details. He was deeply impressed by the quality of the art, especially its line and color, but he felt that the tracings tended to lack life and imagination. He preferred doing watercolor versions, such as these. Above all, it was the romance of the place which got to him.
As twilight fell silently upon the rock cliffs, there was a look of gloom, an aspect of dreary isolation which gave rise to disturbed phantoms which sometimes haunt the mind on the eve of adventure. Most nights, I watched the brilliant, starry heavens, and in imagination called up strange spirits from the past until the first gleam of dawn when, from sheer fatigue, I fell into a deep sleep.
So it was as a 17-year-old artist that Howard Carter was first seduced by the ancient mysteries and vanished civilizations of Egypt. In a moment, we'll track the remarkable career of Howard Carter. From apprentice archaeologist, he became the Indiana Jones of his generation. Here on A&E.
After half a season working as a tracer in Middle Egypt, Howard Carter moved south across the desert to join the new excavations at the remote site of El Amarna, the ancient ruined city of the pharaoh Akhenaten.
A camel's hump is said to vary in size according to the condition of the animal. My old beast must have been in excellent condition. He appeared to have a lump everywhere. I rode him astride, sometimes sideways, but no ways could I get used to his rolling, side-to-side wobble.
Flinders Petrie, the gifted and eccentric father of modern archaeology, had recently started excavations at El Amarna, a city which had been ransacked and deserted after the death of its pharaoh. Petrie gave the 17-year-old artist a brisk, on-site apprenticeship in the sheer hard slog of archaeology. Carter was given his first chance to practice a little independent excavation on his own. So he learned his craft, as he put it, from the very best and sternest of taskmasters. Carter's next move in October 1893 as an artist and draftsman was up the Nile again to Thebes, the traditional capital of ancient Egypt and the city of the living, with its nearby city of the dead just across the river. Carter's new posting was with the Egypt Exploration Fund at Deir el-Bahri, the fantastic mortuary temple of the woman pharaoh Hatshepsut, ancient Egypt's most powerful queen. His role was to record the beautiful reliefs which were emerging in the course of excavations of the walls and pillars of the temple. In 1899, at the age of 25, to the great surprise of his associates, Carter was offered the post of Chief Inspector of Antiquities for the whole of southern Egypt by the French-administered Egyptian Antiquities Service. This senior post required him to be policeman, diplomat, and archaeologist, and his sphere of operations now included the Valley of the Kings at Thebes.
The Valley of the Kings. Of all Egypt's wonders, there is none, I suppose, that makes more instant appeal to the imagination. Here, in this lonely valley head, remote from every sound of life, with the Horn, the highest peak in the Theban hills, standing sentinel like a natural pyramid above them, lay many of Egypt's kings.
But as chief inspector, Carter didn't have the funds to excavate. For that, he'd need a wealthy backer. Theodore Davis, retired American lawyer, millionaire, and archaeology enthusiast, amply fitted the bill, and the two men began working together. Dr. Donald Ryan, an American archaeologist of today, has specialized in retracing Howard Carter's footsteps of this period in the Valley of the Kings, including the rediscovery of tombs which had, surprisingly, been lost again in the meantime.
I'm gonna get this big one here.
How's it going down there?
A couple more minutes. We'll have enough of it cleared so we can go in.
One of the tombs which Don Ryan has recently rediscovered and studied is the anonymous tomb number 60 in a tributary valley on the eastern edge of the Valley of the Kings.
Okay.
Howard Carter first unearthed this tomb in 1903, but was disappointed that in his view, its treasures had, as in so many cases, been thoroughly looted and destroyed in ancient times.
Okay, watch your step, Christopher. These steps weren't made very well. In fact, this entire tomb is crudely carved. I don't think there's a straight line in the entire tomb. It's my feeling that the tomb was commissioned at the death of somebody important and just hacked out in a short period of time. Now the ceiling here is very low, so you're going to have to watch your head. All right.
So despite the fact the tomb contained the denuded mummies of two elderly women, Carter closed it down again and didn't even bother to leave a map of its exact location.
And Howard Carter dashed into this tomb, looked around, saw there were no inscriptions on the wall, apparently was not impressed. Some of these boxes are the various materials that we collected from the different parts of the tomb when we cleared this thing back in 1989.
And Carter missed all of this, or not?
Well, he wasn't interested in this type of tomb. He was into something bigger and better in his mind. And this big wooden box contains the mummy we found lying in approximately this very place on the farm. But there was a second mummy in here, and on its coffin it said Royal Nurse of Queen Hatshepsut. As far as this mummy which remains inside this box, we don't know exactly who it might be. So when you have an undecorated tomb, it can be quite an archaeological puzzle.
Howard Carter spent his years as chief inspector, refining his technique as an excavator, getting to know every inch of the Theban necropolis, and developing a feel for reading the signs. With the tomb of Tutmosis IV, which he began excavating in January 1903, Carter found exactly the kind of tomb he was looking for, and incidentally, Theodore Davis was paying for. He too would have left his hat outside to show passers-by that he was at work within. Hey, this is more like it.
This is just the kind of tomb Howard Carter was hoping to find. It's a beautifully painted royal tomb of the 18th dynasty. All the little tombs he found prior to this really pale in comparison.
Carter said about this that at last he'd drawn a prize in the lottery of excavation. His moment of triumph.
Well, you can see right here, there's some ancient evidence of tomb robbery. This is an ancient tomb robber's rope that was tied around the pillar here. You can see it's knotted so that the tomb robbers could climb up and down.
Incredible.
What does an excavator do in the moment of triumph, when he feels he has drawn a large prize? Here were all the proofs that I had found the tomb of Pharaoh Thutmose IV.
Have a look at
which,
this.
as you may conceive, gave me a considerable degree of satisfaction.
This is a bit of ancient graffiti written in cursive form of hieroglyphs. And it says, Year 8, 3rd month of summer, Day 1, in the reign of King Horemheb. That'd be about 1311 BC. King Horemheb commanded Maya, which was one of his officials, restore the burial of King Thutmosis IV.
Restore the burial, what does that mean?
It means that within 80 years of the burial of King Thutmosis IV, his tomb had been robbed.
It looks like someone's tried to cut out that goddess's head. Do you think that might have happened in antiquity as well?
Probably not. The robbers in antiquity were more interested in precious metals and jewels and gold and such, whereas more modern robbers would be more interested in artistic things that they could sell on the art market.
Within this burial chamber, everything had been broken to bits and thrown helter-skelter by those ruthless vandals, the tomb plunderers, who in their thirst for gold had spared nothing.
And this is the great quartzite sarcophagus of Thutmosis IV, although his mummy would never be found in this tomb.
Carter, I think, said that there are all sorts of bits of linen and ceramic lying around the sarcophagus here, so the scene resembled an orgy rather than a hallowed place. And I believe he thought that the robbers of antiquity had done it. By 1904, Howard Carter's work as Inspector of Antiquities and as archaeologist had earned him a great deal of respect, if not always affection, among the communities in which he mixed. Above all, the local villagers of Gorna, on the way to the Valley of the Kings. He'd learned to speak their language. He even on occasion dressed like them, and he sometimes preferred their company to that of his European colleagues.
To while away the darker nights, I indulge in the diversions of the guest house. I must admit, however, that this practice was liable to serious criticism by colleagues in the government service. They thought it degrading.
There's no doubt that Howard Carter was a highly valued member of the Antiquities Service, but he also had a very hot temper. And in a moment, we'll see how his temper got him into trouble when some unruly French tourists start a brawl in the tomb of the sacred bulls of Saqqara. The unraveling of Carter's exemplary career when the face of Tutankhamun continues.
Every time you make a long-distance call, AT&T sends out a signal to check the quality of the line, automatically routing around trouble before you've even finished dialing. Because in business, it all comes back to getting your calls through. Guaranteed network reliability at a competitive price.
Linda, I'd like to bounce an idea.
Only from AT&T for the life of your business.
Every species has its own method of transporting its young. Some means of getting offspring from one place to another. Safely, comfortably, and reliably. And human beings are no exception. The Land Rover Discovery, far superior to carrying your children in your mouth.
This is a good place to make saints, and it is a good place for saints to live.
As the Moses of his people, Brigham Young led the mass migration of Mormons to the Salt Lake Valley. Embracing polygamy, he rejected American law and became the first governor of the territory of Utah. Brigham Young. As Power of Faith Week begins on an all-new biography, tomorrow at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific on A&E.
The following special presentation, The Face of Tutankhamun, will return after these messages.
This October on TBS, you will never look at plants the same way again. Join critically acclaimed host Sir David Attenborough for a unique view of plant life. Because it's a jungle out there. What's going on in your garden? The Private Life of Plants, a TBS original, premieres October 9th and 10th, 8:05 Eastern, 5:05 Pacific, only on TBS.
Of Tutankhamun continues.
In late 1904, Carter was moved from the Inspectorate of Upper to Lower Egypt, which included in its sphere of influence the great necropolis around the step pyramid of Saqqara. After 5 years, it was time for a change, but unfortunately, the new post was to go disastrously wrong. A week into the new year of 1905, and a party of some 15 French people, having had a jolly good lunch over in the palm groves of Memphis, and having had several bottles of wine to wash it down, arrived here at the Saqqara necropolis by donkey and asked in a semi-coherent way to see the monuments. The local ticket inspector, naturally enough, asked them for their money, and several of them refused to pay. They hung around, had a few more drinks, and made their way down to the Serapeum. The Serapeum is an underground complex of tombs where the sacred bulls of Apis were buried. There, the French visitors, not all of whom had tickets, found that without candles, they couldn't see a thing. So they demanded their money back, at which point the tomb guard had his tarbouche knocked off his head. It was time for Chief Inspector Howard Carter to be summoned to confront the French. He asked for everyone's name and address and requested the group to leave the site immediately. They refused, and in the course of further exchanges, one of the tomb guards was hit in the face, and Carter himself was threatened with a punch on the nose. The phrase dirty French was heard by several witnesses to soil Howard Carter's lips as he ordered his men to defend themselves as best they could. A couple of tomb guards were quite seriously hurt, an interior decorator got hit on the head, and an accountant from a French gas company was felled to the ground with a truncheon. Any compromise on Carter's part would have settled things. To set natives against Europeans, he was told, was not proper, but he simply wouldn't see it that way. In the next few days, Howard Carter demanded that legal action be taken against the French who'd started the affray in the first place, while on the French side, a formal complaint was lodged with Monsieur Gaston Maspero, the director of antiquities. Maspero felt a token expression of regret to the French consul general was in order. Theodore Davis advised him to give in for the sake of peace and harmony. That, he added, was the gentlemanly thing to do. But Carter wouldn't budge. So, at the age of 31, he'd done serious damage to an exemplary career and subsequently resigned. He returned south to Luxor and lived in self-imposed isolation amongst the locals in the foothills of the City of the Dead. For the next 3 years, he guided wealthy visitors around the sites of Upper Egypt and sought commissions for his watercolor paintings. He was short of money, and it was a hand-to-mouth sort of existence.
A far greater trial lies in the monotonous life that one is obliged to lead. The wearisome sameness day after day. The passing of months without companionship. A loneliness that can at times become almost intolerable. Without some mental occupation, it would, I believe, become suicidal.
In summer 1907, Carter returned to England, where he learned that Lord and Lady Amherst, who'd encouraged him to go to Egypt in the first place, had hit hard times. Didlington Hall was up for sale, and the great Egyptian collection was to be dispersed. His world seemed to be collapsing all around him. But his love of Egypt and the fact he had nowhere else to go took him back, where he added a new occupation to his makeshift career as a part-time dealer in antiquities, a job for which he was well qualified. He knew what he was doing and was well known to those who regularly sold their discoveries and acquisitions in the bazaars and side streets. It was a case of gamekeeper turned poacher. And are these popular, these kind of things? And your ceiling, now that really is old, eh?
I was not for sale.
If Carter was to return from this unhappy interlude to the work he most wanted, the work of the excavator, he'd need another wealthy patron to support him. George Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon, was a sporting gentleman. In the early years of the century, he'd had a spectacular motoring accident, which led him to spend time away from the family home at Highclere Castle, Wiltshire, on doctor's orders, in a place where the climate was said to be better for him, and also to his search for another absorbing pastime, the excavation and collection of Egyptian antiquities. I would much rather, he said, find an unrifled tomb than win the Derby. And he was in the enviable position to do both. At first, Carnarvon was granted a permit to excavate here in a part of the Theban necropolis where even an amateur could do little damage. It had been rummaged over many times before, and all he had to show for his investment was a mummified cat. But he was absolutely thrilled with it and determined to secure a better concession. For this, he would need a professional advisor and assistant, someone with more credibility. Gaston Maspero suggested his ex-colleague, Howard Carter. It was the start of a most unlikely friendship between the grandee who admired Carter's skills and the craftsman who returned the compliment by modelling himself on his patron. Neither of them could imagine where the partnership would eventually take them.
Why would a sportsman like Lord Carnarvon be willing to spend so much time and money looking for an ancient tomb? Well, as Rudyard Kipling once said about the life of an archaeologist, it furnishes a scholarly pursuit with all the excitement of a gold prospector's life. I think it can be safely said that Lord Carnarvon never imagined the fame and glory his hobby would eventually bring him. In a moment, we'll take a hair-raising trip 130 feet down a cliff in search of a hidden tomb. We'll retrace Howard Carter's footsteps across the desert when the face of Tutankhamun continues. Tutankhamun, here on A&E.
As a sign of Carter's newfound security, he decided to design and build his own castle, a permanent home at the entrance to the Valley of the Kings, which he called Castle Carter. What he yearned for was a concession in the valley itself. What he got was permission to work around its margins. Remote and difficult areas such as the mountains 1,800 feet above the valley, which involved several hours' trek by donkey and on foot across the hot desert, sometimes concealed secret tombs. The most dramatic discovery occurred a while later, when Howard Carter heard down the grapevine that a rock tomb in a sheer cliff face had been revealed by a flash flood, and that tomb robbers were already at work. Dr. Don Ryan took me on a hair-raising trip in temperatures which reached 55 degrees centigrade to retrace Howard Carter's steps towards the scene of the crime.
How much further have we got to go? A little ways further, but from here it's all on foot.
How long will it take?
20 minutes, half hour, something like that.
That's your pace.
It's your pace.
I should take about 3 hours.
There it is.
You're kidding me. So where's the tomb?
It's a little opening up in the cliff.
God. That one there, halfway down?
Right. That's it.
How on earth did you get to it? How'd you get down there? God. I think it looks lethal.
Piece of cake.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty inaccessible. They certainly hid it. So you have to come down from the top?
Right.
You've obviously done this before.
Once or twice.
I haven't, Donald.
It's not a problem.
I see.
There isn't and wasn't a path up this mountain, just a field of boulders with a sheer drop on either side of it, which has seldom been disturbed since Carter's day.
God.
We're right on top of the cliff right now.
It's all getting a bit macho for me.
Great. Let's do it.
When we arrived above the tomb, I found that the plundering Arabs had crept down a crack extending halfway down the cleft to a narrow ledge in the rock. For anyone who suffers from vertigo, it certainly was not pleasant.
Oh, it's slippy. This is the easy part.
Thank you. Ow. Sorry about that. Rock fall. There's plenty more where that came from. Point of no return coming. Where do I put my leg?
Right here.
Right. Well done. Well done. My goodness. It's just a sheer drop.
Well, this is where we set up the ropes. See? Right. Here comes the wind.
Don, I don't think that I'm going to go any further. I've made it to the plateau. I think Carter calls it not for people with vertigo, and I'll drink to that.
Carter probably used a knotted rope of some sort. It would be pretty scary. And he didn't have all this modern mountaineering equipment. Solid.
That's reassuring.
All right, I'm going to give this a toss. Rope!
The guide pointed out to me the end of a rope which dangled sheer down the face of a cliff. Listening, we could hear the robbers actually at work. So I first severed their rope, cutting off their means of escape, and then, making secure a good stout rope of my own, I lowered myself down the cliff.
Set. And ready.
Chucked away. You okay?
Oh, yeah. No problem. It's a bit bumpy.
I'm deeply impressed with the range of skills that archaeologists show. I had no idea.
Shinning down a rope into a nest full of industrious tomb robbers is a pastime which at least does not lack excitement. There were 8 at work, and I gave them the alternative of clearing out by means of my rope, or else of staying where they were without a rope at all. Eventually they saw reason.
Carter wasn't sure what he'd find inside this cunningly concealed tomb 130 feet down from the top of the cliff. It had a half-finished, unoccupied look to it. It seemed that the tomb was originally intended for the young Hatshepsut, who'd had an inscribed quartzite sarcophagus placed there in readiness, but that after she seized the throne, she abandoned it for a grander memorial and a mortuary temple, that same temple on which Howard Carter had worked for 6 years.
Oh, this is very strange. This little room here is full of water. I'm not going in there. This is water that probably entered this tomb sometime during the winter. The rains that occurred filled this tomb.
So, after the incredible labor and imagination involved in preparing it, this cliff tomb was never used.
In this secret spot, her mummy would have had a reasonable chance of avoiding disturbance. In the valley, it had none. A king she would be, and a king's fate she shared.
How was it done? Been damaged excessively by flooding. See, when Howard Carter was working on this tomb over a period of 20 days, he came up and down this little bit here in a net.
Let down by someone from above or from below?
Hell, probably with a pulley of some sort.
Yeah. Sounds a more civilized way to travel to me.
Time was running out for Carter when he resumed his search for the hidden tomb of Tutankhamun. But the payoff was just around the corner. Hidden beneath the Egyptian sands for more than 3,000 years was the most incredible treasure ever uncovered. And Carter, Lord Carnarvon, and Tutankhamun were about to become media stars. A&E's presentation of The Face of Tutankhamun will continue in a moment on A&E.
In spring 1914, Theodore Davis publicly announced that the Valley of the Tombs is now exhausted, and he pulled out. But Carter was convinced there was still at least one more tomb to be found, and he had good reason. Every day, hundreds of tourists walk past this spot, which is unmarked, without even noticing it. And yet, it played a key part in the research which led to Howard Carter's great discovery. The research involved a series of finds made between 1905 and 1909 under the patronage of Theodore Davis. In particular, the discovery of some objects which proved to bear the name Tutankhamun. The discovery was from this so-called tomb, which is less of a tomb really, more of a box cut into the rock. And it took the form of 12 storage jars, the remains of a funerary feast, some embalming fluid, and some seal impressions. Theodore Davis was convinced he'd stumbled on the badly plundered tomb of Tutankhamun, and he said as much at a public gathering where he also showed what happened to papyrus when it had been buried for over 3,000 years by tearing a large piece of it to pieces in front of the assembled company. Howard Carter was less convinced. He came to believe that the objects which were removed from this so-called tomb had been taken from another royal tomb, which must be located nearby. The true significance of these discoveries wasn't appreciated until later, by which time Carter had planned a systematic search of the valley beyond. But his plans came abruptly to a halt. At the age of 40, Carter wasn't expected to see active service in the First World War. But at the beginning of 1915, he was recruited into the shadowy world of the intelligence department of the War Office in Cairo, where his knowledge of Arabic was useful for official communications, and where he became a kind of king's messenger. But it wasn't until the end of the war that he could return to archaeology in earnest. Work resumed in the valley in December 1917, with Howard Carter still digging on behalf of Lord Carnarvon, but now planning what he called a systematic and exhaustive approach to the whole business of finding an undiscovered tomb. It was an approach which involved taking a 2.5-acre area of ground, defined by the triangle, the tomb of Ramses VI, the tomb of Meneptah, and the tomb of Ramses II. A triangle rather like this: Ramses VI, Meneptah, Ramses II. Then, dividing it up on a grid system derived from plans for artillery barrages in the First World War, and then systematically digging away all the loose chippings and debris right down to the bedrock. As Carter commented, in 1917, our real campaign in the valley commenced. Carnarvon employed up to 100 men to shift thousands of tons of stone chippings thrown up by previous excavations. As 5 seasons went by, Carnarvon was all for abandoning a search which seemed to be getting nowhere slowly. But Carter argued for one last season, which he even offered to fund himself, and Carnarvon eventually agreed. The season would begin on the 1st of November 1922 with the clearance of the remains of some ancient workmen's huts built for the labourers who dug the tomb of Ramses VI. It was his last chance. 3 days later, a slab of limestone was uncovered here, probably by the water boy, the most junior member of the workforce. It turned out to be a step cut into the bedrock. By late afternoon, the outlines of 12 steps had been cleared, leading down to the upper part of a door, which was plastered and sealed. But the seal impressions on the door were indistinct. With enormous self-control, Carter ordered the steps to be filled in and sent a telegram in code to Lord Carnarvon. 2.5 weeks later, Lord Carnarvon and his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, arrived in Egypt, and by the afternoon of the 24th of November, the stairwell had been cleared. Digging down a few inches below the seal impressions he'd already looked at, they unearthed some much clearer ones. Carter could even make out a name on one of them, the name of Tutankhamun. But their excitement became anxiety when they saw that the door had been opened by force at least once before and then replastered and resealed in antiquity. The door was carefully removed, revealing a 30-foot sloping passageway filled with limestone chippings, through which a tunnel had already been dug and again refilled in the top left-hand corner. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon of Sunday, 26th of November, the passageway had been cleared. There was a second sealed door. His hands shaking, his throat dry, Carter cut a small hole through the door. He lit a candle and peered into the darkness.
At first I could see nothing. The hot air escaping from the chamber caused the candle flame to flicker. But presently, as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room within emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere, the glint of gold.
33 centuries had passed since Tutankhamun was sealed in his royal tomb by the pious hands of his subjects. But after 3,000 years of silence, the boy king was once again surrounded by life. Next, on the face of Tutankhamun, we'll unlock the mystery of what lay behind the sealed doors. An exploration of the gold-filled chambers of the ancient tomb as Carter and his archaeological team encounter unimaginable riches and come face to face with the mummy of Tut. So stay with us. The Face of Tutankhamun. Welcome to A&E's special presentation, The Face of Tutankhamun. A look at the magic, mystery, and controversy surrounding the legendary discovery of the boy king's tomb. One of the greatest moments in the whole history of archaeology was that moment, November 26, 1922, when archaeologist Howard Carter turned to his patron, Lord Carnarvon, who had asked him what could be seen through the small hole just dug into the door of the newly discovered tomb. "Can you see anything?" asked Lord Carnarvon anxiously. Carter is said to have replied, "Yes, wonderful things."
Those three simple words are enough to conjure up all the romance and excitement of the most successful treasure hunt of all time. The hunt for a lost royal tomb, which took Carter and Carnarvon 5 long years and which had almost been abandoned at the last minute. Carter wrote of the day of days, the most wonderful that I have ever lived through. A wonderful day, wonderful things. Actually, like so many of the well-known stories associated with that newly discovered tomb, the one about wonderful things didn't quite happen like that. It started life about a year later with the official published version of events. At the time, Lord Carnarvon remembered Carter as saying, "There are some marvelous objects in here," while Carter himself, in his journal entry for that day of days, recalls saying, "Yes, it's wonderful." Anyway, whatever was actually said, Carter immediately set about enlarging that small hole which was in the sealed door. And then, accompanied by Lord Carnarvon, Lady Evelyn Herbert, Carnarvon's daughter, and Arthur Callender, an engineer and long-standing friend of Carter's, he clambered down into the antechamber of the tomb. As they all squeezed through the hole in the door, the sight which greeted them took their breath away.
Uncanny beasts, enough to look upon at any time. Their brilliant gilded surfaces picked out of the darkness by our electric torch, their heads throwing grotesque, distorted shadows on the wall behind them, they were almost terrifying. Next, on the right, 2 statues caught and held our attention. 2 life-size figures of a king in black, facing each other like sentinels, gold-kilted, armed with mace and staff.
Nothing so complete had ever been found in Egypt before. Having recovered from the excitement and resealed the small hole in the door, the party returned here to Castle Carter, overlooking the Valley of the Kings. Hundreds of questions flooded in on their minds. What might lie beyond that sealed door? Would there be a long passageway like the other royal tombs in the valley, or a series of small chambers, each with its own sealed door? Had the tomb been plundered? Were they absolutely certain there was a tomb there at all? And were there wonderful treasures to behold in addition to the things they'd already seen? Well, says Carter, the solutions to those mysteries would simply have to wait until the official opening in the presence of high-ranking Egyptians. So the party would just have to be incredibly patient. Research into the archives certainly supports the fact that not much sleep was had that night. but suggest that the reason there wasn't much sleep is that the party decided, probably right here in this very room, to go back to the tomb that same night to take a secret look at all the chambers for themselves. What may have happened in the tomb after that is still a matter of heated debate and controversy among historians. What exactly did Howard Carter and his party do when they re-entered the tomb? Well, the first thing was closely to inspect the contents of the antechamber, which Carter in his notebook likened to the property room of an opera of a vanished civilization. A confused mess of wooden and gilded parts from 6 chariots. Under the gilt couches, painted and inlaid caskets, chairs, pottery jars, as well as a golden throne. Then they confirmed that, as Carter had feared, someone had broken into the tomb in antiquity. A small opening into what came to be called the annex could be seen beneath one of the animal couches. And between the 2 guardian figures on the north wall, there was another sealed door, which had also been breached. Now, there's no doubt that Carter reopened the robber's hole and that he, Carnarvon and Lady Evelyn squeezed even further into the tomb to see the burial chamber, almost completely filled with a huge golden shrine. Behind the shrine was a 4th open chamber, which they called the storeroom or treasury. As Carter said, "I've got Tutankhamun, that is certain." Only 2 days later, the official opening of the tomb of Tutankhamun took place. The Times report, published the following day, was the very first to make public the news of this staggering discovery. It was to start a rush of journalists, tourists, and other archaeologists, many of whom were employed by New York's Metropolitan Museum. Letters and telegrams poured in. One welcome cable of congratulation came from Albert Lithgow, curator of the Egyptian department at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Carter was quick to reply. "Thanks message, discovery colossal and need every assistance, stop. Could you consider loan of Burton in recording in time being, stop. Costs to us. Every regards, Carter, Caro." The reply to this one came back almost immediately. "Only too delighted to assist in every possible way, stop. Please call upon Burton and any other members of our staff, stop." It was a very generous offer, and it helped to bond Carter to the Met, a museum which would benefit greatly from this relationship in years to come. Other offers of help flooded in as Carter and Carnarvon began to assemble the greatest team of archaeological experts the world had ever seen. It included Harry Burton of the Met, responsible for photographing every stage of the tomb's clearance. The team had no idea at that stage of the enormity of the task confronting them. Lord Carnarvon wrote of the many weeks of work ahead of Carter. In fact, the recording and the mapping and the drawing and the photographing and the conserving of the many thousands of objects to be found within the tomb was to take all of 10 years. A routine was quickly established with the antechamber. Each object or group of objects was given a reference number. In the case of the Golden Throne, it was number 91. And it was photographed in situ with or without the reference number in shot. Each object was then located on a ground plan and given a brief description written by Howard Carter or Arthur Mace on a numbered reference card, sometimes with a drawing in pencil or ink to help with the details of visual identification. This particular drawing of the throne by Howard Carter is clear and accurate, and although it was done on the spot at great speed, still useful. Each object was then taken over to the laboratory tomb for cleaning and conservation and to be rephotographed against a neutral background before being shipped off to Cairo. No wonder Carter sometimes thought and even wrote there was more to be done than any human agency could accomplish. The sheer enormity of the operation was without precedent, and the burden of responsibility was a heavy one. Harry Burton's great photographs taken inside the tomb are justly famous. But what's less well known is that he also shot a great deal of movie footage outside the tomb, which has seldom been seen since 1923. This rare archive film shows that in February 1923, the tomb was just like a stage set, with the audience waiting for the performance to begin. The discoveries were being given more worldwide publicity than anything ever in the history of science. Almost overnight, Carter and Carnarvon became international celebrities.
The tomb draws like a magnet. Around the top of the upper level of the tomb there is a low wall, and here they stake a claim, waiting for something to happen. We are really alarmed sometimes that the whole wall might give way and a crowd of visitors be precipitated into the mouth of the tomb.
The cleaning and preserving of Tutankhamun's treasures in the overwhelming heat of Egypt was taking its toll on Carter and his team. It was slow, difficult work, and the press was unhappy with how long it was taking. But soon, headlines all over the world would be full of an equally sensational story: the sudden death of Lord Carnarvon and the curse of the mummy when the face of Tutankhamun here on A&E.
It had taken 7 weeks to clear the antechamber, and on the 17th of February 1923, everything was ready for the official opening of the next chamber and the solution of the mystery of what lay beyond the sealed door. Carter and Carnarvon, of course, secretly knew the solution already. Carter stepped onto the wooden platform, stripped to his vest, and struck the first blow with his chisel. It took him nearly 2 hours to make a hole big enough for the assembled company to enter. Beyond the sealed door was the huge golden box built to cover and protect the royal sarcophagus. And the first thing they saw of it, as Carter had seen more than 3 months before, was a pair of protective eyes staring back at them. The strains of work, the deception, not to mention entertaining groups of dignitaries who by now were queuing up. The strains had been tremendous, and it was agreed that the team should close the tomb and take a few days off. Carter locked himself in his house at the entrance of the valley, did his best to discourage visitors, and contemplated his future. Relations between him and Lord Carnarvon had reached breaking point, and a peacemaking letter written by Carnarvon to Carter at this time reveals how, amid all the stresses and strains, their working partnership had been developing into a very close friendship.
I have no doubt that I have done many foolish things, and I'm very sorry. But there is only one thing I want to say to you. Whatever your feelings are, or will be for me in the future, my affection for you will never change. I'm a man of few friends, and whatever happens, nothing will alter my feelings for you. I could not rest until I had written to you.
There's no record of Carter's reply, and Carnarvon was far too busy negotiating in Cairo and elsewhere to discuss such personal matters in the privacy they deserved. If there was one thing which transformed the story of an archaeological dig into one of the great melodramas of the day, it was what happened next. Before he left for Cairo, Lord Carnarvon was bitten on the left cheek by an insect, most probably a mosquito. The following morning, while he was shaving here in a suite of rooms at the Winter Palace Hotel, Luxor, he accidentally nicked the head off the small pimple which had formed. By the time he reached Cairo, his entire face had begun to ache, the glands on his neck had swelled up, and he was beginning to run a very high temperature. His doctor advised him to be very careful about what he ate and drank, and as far as possible to rest in bed, advice which Carnarvon coolly swept aside. He continued to drink good bottles of claret, which had been shipped over from the cellars at Highclere, and even to go to the cinema, where he watched the film right through to the end, even though by now he was seriously and visibly ill. Lady Evelyn Herbert wrote to Carter expressing her concern. The old man, she said, is feeling just too rotten for words, and he's confined to his bed. This was followed by an urgent telegram explaining that the situation had become grave. Carter rushed to Cairo to be at his friend's bedside. Lady Carnarvon was summoned from England, and the patient was heard to murmur, "I have heard the call. I am preparing." His whole body weakened by blood poisoning, the 57-year-old Earl had succumbed to pneumonia, and in the early hours of April the 5th, 1923, he passed away. If ever there was an untimely death, this was it. Carter had not only lost a close friend and patron, he'd been left on his own to deal with an increasingly tense political situation. With the tomb closed over the hot summer months, he persuaded Lady Carnarvon to continue with the concession, but the second season was all set to be even more difficult than the first. To add to Carter's problems, there were riots and demonstrations on the streets as the nationalists and their recently formed political party struggled to make their country independent of the protection of Britain. The result was that the wider context of Egyptian archaeology changed forever, and the Tutankhamun excavation was at the center of that change. In future, they'd be working by courtesy of the Egyptian government, who'd expect all the finest antiquities to go to Cairo. In October 1923, the first post-Carnarvon season was ready to start, but a by now constant stream of official visitors interrupted their work, and Carter was under increasing pressure from the Antiquities Department, under its outspoken director, Pierre Lecow, to knuckle under to their way of managing affairs relating to the tomb. The first challenge was to open the great gilded shrine. The guardian statues had to be carefully removed and the whole of the north partition wall demolished. Once inside, Carter slid back the ebony bolts to reveal a second shrine. Only this time, the seal of Tutankhamun was unbroken. Finally, protected by no less than 4 massive shrines, there was the yellow sarcophagus itself, carved from a solid block of the hardest quartzite. The task of dismantling and shifting the 4 shrines, which disassembled into 51 separate sections, took far longer than expected. Eventually, by February 1924, the whole world was waiting for the granite lid of the sarcophagus to be lifted. As Egyptian officials and members of the team stood in silence, the lifting tackle took the strain.
A huge slab, weighing over 1.25 tons, rose from its bed. A sight met our eyes that at first puzzled us. The contents were completely covered by dark linen shrouds. We rolled back these covering shrouds, and a gasp of wonderment escaped our lips. The golden effigy of the young boy king.
Carter's plan, after the formal opening, was to allow the wives of his colleagues into the tomb to have a private view of the king. But the newly appointed Minister of Public Works in Egypt, a well-known nationalist, had been imprisoned for treason by the British a few years before. He took a deep dislike to Carter as a person, an Englishman, and as a walking symbol of imperialism. So in response to Carter's request, he refused to allow the ladies into the tomb. Why should they go in, he argued, before the wives of Egyptian dignitaries or even cabinet ministers? And by sending an armed column of policemen on camels and horses across the river to the Valley of the Kings to make sure that his instructions were fully carried out. Carter, by now so nervous and exhausted that he was said to be scarcely in control of himself, met with his team here in the bar at the Winter Palace Hotel to decide noisily and publicly on his best course of action. In the heat of the moment, he dictated a furious statement.
Owing to the impossible restrictions and discourtesies on the part of the Public Works Department and its Antiquities Service, all my collaborators in protest have refused to work any further. I am therefore obliged to make known to the public that the tomb will be closed and no further work carried out. Signed, Howard Carter.
By refusing to continue work at the tomb, Carter had in fact infringed the terms of the Carnarvon concession, and so it was duly cancelled. The first strike and lockout in the history of archaeology put Tutankhamun back into the world's headlines. Officials, backed up by soldiers, forced the tomb open again. The resulting public row left it in some doubt whether Carter would ever work in Egypt again. When the officials then searched through the material left by Carter and his team, they found another apparent irregularity. A commission of Egyptians from the Antiquities Department, headed by Pierre Lecow, was preparing an inventory of all the materials used by Carter and his team while they were in the valley. And in one of the storage tombs, known as the Lunch Tomb, tucked away in a wooden box, they found a beautiful wooden painted sculpture of a boy's head emerging from a sacred lotus flower of the Nile. The strange case of the Fortnum & Mason's wine box was about to begin. Strange because the sculpture wasn't labelled or docketed or numbered, while all the other treasures they found were covered in identifying labels. Carter was usually meticulous about such things. Had Carter been intending surreptitiously to remove the piece from the tomb in its very British box? Was it his own personal property which he'd brought to the tomb for reference purposes? Eventually, Carter explained in a coded telegram from London that he'd found the sculpture, which by the way was of the boy king Tutankhamun himself, in the entrance passageway, and that in all the excitement of subsequent finds, he'd omitted to put it in his index. Lecow was satisfied with this and whisked the piece off to the Cairo Museum. But lingering doubts remained. How on earth had Carter managed to forget about so important, even capital a piece? And why didn't he mention it in any of his writings or statements when much lesser pieces got a great deal of space? The strange case of the Fortnum & Mason's wine box was to follow Carter around as, on April the 12th, he left for a major lecture tour of the United States of America. His reception in New York, the first stop in a grueling whistle-stop schedule covering 18 cities in the States and Canada, was rapturous. Lecture halls were filled to capacity, and there was even an invitation to the White House to meet President Calvin Coolidge and give a private performance. At Yale University, he was awarded an honorary doctorate of science, the only academic recognition he was ever to be given. In city after city, journalists queued up to hear his stories. A new phase in his career was beginning. Carter, the international celebrity. In public, he seemed to be in excellent spirits, but he was still very worried about the mess he'd left behind.
The political climate in Egypt had changed since Carter left for his lecture tour. There had been a terrorist murder of an Englishman, Sir Lee Stack, on November 19th, and the British government had retaliated by cracking down hard on Egyptian nationalists. So it was possible that as a concession to the British government, the Egyptian antiquities officials agreed to allow Carter to resume the Tut project. On January 13th, 1925, Carter continued his work on the tomb, but this time he was playing by a different set of rules. Now he was working for the Egyptian government. After years of searching for the boy king and his treasure, Carter was forced to relinquish any claim to it. Still, one of the most exciting moments of the project lay just ahead. the opening of the royal sarcophagus when the face of Tutankhamun...
1925, a grand send-off to what promised at last to be a settled season of work. As the tomb was being cleared, the team could hear the cracks and creaks of objects adjusting to the new environmental conditions. There were inscribed and painted boxes and chests, crammed full of delicate fabrics, jewellery and cosmetics. The king's favourite things buried with him in the belief that his spirit could enjoy them second time around in the afterlife. Perhaps to the sound of his military trumpets, which after restoration could still be played. There were hundreds of small articles of clothing, such as rush sandals, which almost fell apart to the touch. There were even more fragile linen gloves. There were dried wreaths of flowers, which, like the fabrics, had to be stabilized and conserved with paraffin wax before they could be moved, a great test for the early science of conservation. It's a tribute to chemist Alfred Lucas that of the many thousands of objects found, only 1/4% of them were lost. Without on-the-spot preliminary conservation, Carter estimated, barely 10% of the objects would have been fit for public display. But even during this relentlessly detailed work, they continued to be amazed by the beauty of the objects. When the two main chambers had been cleared, it was time to tackle the delicate operation of raising and opening the nest of coffins within the sarcophagus. On the 13th of October 1925, the second coffin was revealed. When the lid of this coffin was raised, a third one was seen, covered with a reddish shroud and garlands of flowers.
An astounding fact was disclosed. The third coffin, 6 feet 1 3/4 inch in length, was made of solid gold. Its weight was as much as 8 strong men could lift. An enormous mass of pure bullion. The face of this gold coffin was again that of the king.
At 9:45 a.m. on the 11th of November 1925, a solemn group of Egyptian officials gathered around the golden coffin to witness the final opening and the revealing of the mummy itself. Carter found inside the coffin a black resinous substance which fixed the mummy firmly in place. But what claimed everyone's attention was the golden image of the king.
The mask, a beautiful and unique specimen of ancient portraiture, bears a sad but calm expression, suggestive of youth overtaken prematurely by death. Upon its forehead were the royal insignia, the vulture and the serpent, emblems of the 2 kingdoms over which he had reigned.
For the next 8 days, the work of dislodging the mummy and removing the linen wrappings was carried out in almost complete silence. A coating of melted paraffin wax was painted over the delicate, powdery outer layer. Once this was dry, an incision was made down the center of the outer binding, and the wrappings were peeled back, revealing layer after layer of symbolic jewels and amulets which had been bandaged in with the royal mummy. As each stage in the unwrapping process was reached, Carter made drawings of the exact position of each piece of jewellery on the king's head and neck, body and arms. In all, a staggering 97 separate groups of objects. But in the process of unwrapping all of this beauty and wealth, Carter and his team had to burn, cut through and chisel the pitch-like substance which held everything together, and even to dismember the corpse itself. Their devouring passion for all the treasures evidently outweighed their interest in the human remains. Forcing the mask from the dismembered face seems today to have been the final indignity. The pathetic remains of the boy king had to be put back together again and laid out on a sand tray for Harry Burton to photograph them.
All the chambers of the tomb had now been opened and explored. The period of discovery was over. When the face of Tutankhamun continues, the difficult conservation efforts drag on.
The last time we were here was when I proposed. 10 years. It seems like only yesterday. I told you then how much I loved you, and nothing's changed.
The Diamond Anniversary Band. On your 10th, show her you'd marry her all over again.
Warning, another dull Tuesday coming up. For your own sake, save it. Serve Rosetto pasta. Your family will get an authentic pasta dinner with the ease of boiling water. And your Tuesday dinner experience will change. Sibling rivalry will disappear. Telemarketers will stop calling. The dog will lie down with the cat. And a calm will descend as Rosetto's tender tortellini with its ricotta, romano, and Parmesan cheeses finds its mark. So get the Rosetto out of the freezer case. It works. It's been tested by people with mouths, and Tuesday can happen any minute now.
Well, we're here with Wanda and Babs, who feel that their zipper bag is fine and will not switch to Gladlock zipper bags.
That's right. Ditto.
Now, Babbo, let's say you hold some of your famous chicken gravy upside down over Wanda's head, sealed in either your bag or the Gladlock bag with the yellow and blue make green seal, so you know the bag is closed. Your bag doesn't have a green seal.
Well, I say let's go for it with our bag. Why switch? Because it's my head. We'll switch to Gladlock.
Good call, Wanda. When it really counts, get Gladlock.
Something happens when you read the Wall Street Journal every business day. You start seeing opportunities where you never saw them before. See for yourself. Subscribe now to the Wall Street Journal. The Journal keeps you right at the heart of what's going on in business. Call now for the Journal and get your free guide to planning your financial future. Facts you need to start planning a secure future right now. Get 10 weeks of the Wall Street Journal for just $38 and get the guide free.
Call now 800-847-7200. That's 800-847-7200.
This is a good place to make saints, and it is a good place for saints to live.
As the Moses of his people, Brigham Young led the mass migration of Mormons to the Salt Lake Valley. Embracing polygamy, he rejected American law and became the first governor of the territory of Utah. Brigham Young. As Power of Faith Week begins on an all-new biography, tomorrow at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific on A&E.
We now return to the face of Tutankhamun here on A&E.
The following summer 1926, Howard Carter returned to England to recover from the strains and responsibilities of his great project. Meanwhile, here at Highclere Castle, Lady Carnarvon was busy preparing to auction off the entire contents of her late husband's collection of antiquities. Indeed, it was said that she was still so upset that she forbade anyone to utter the dreaded name of Tutankhamun anywhere on the estate. Now, in his will, Lord Carnarvon had suggested that Howard Carter be made negotiator or consultant in the event of a sale, and he tried hard to persuade Lady Carnarvon to cancel the public auction and to enter into private negotiations with the British Museum in London for some giveaway sum. In the end, the entire collection was sold to the Metropolitan Museum in New York for the princely sum of $145,000. Now, it seems that when the collection was housed here at Highclere, a few of the objects bore the name or the royal markings of Tutankhamun. But by the time the collection was shipped over to New York, they'd been quietly removed, presumably in order to avoid embarrassment to all concerned. Perhaps this was the reason why Lord Carnarvon had been so insistent that Carter be named as negotiator. And perhaps it was also the reason why certain members of staff at the Met insisted on referring to the Carnarvon collection as a pocket collection. All these complex arrangements took some time, and when they were over, Howard Carter was quite ready to return to the next season back in the Valley of the Kings. The 1926 season began with an unemotional entry in Carter's diary.
The outermost coffin containing the king's mummy, finally rewrapped, was lowered into the sarcophagus this morning. We are now ready to begin the investigation of the storeroom, or treasury.
This small room off the east wall of the burial chamber was to contain some of the most wonderful things of all.
Immediately in front of the entrance lay the figure of the jackal god Anubis upon his shrine, swathed in linen and resting upon a portable sled. Facing the doorway on the farther side stood the most beautiful monument I have ever seen. The central portion of it consisted of a large shrine-shaped chest, completely overlaid with gold. Surrounding this, freestanding, were statues of the 4 tutelary goddesses of the dead, gracious figures, with outstretched protective arms, so natural and lifelike in their pose, so pitiful and compassionate that one felt it almost sacrilege to look at them. There were also distributed in different quarters of the chamber a seemingly endless number of shrine-shaped boxes and chests.
One of these boxes, undecorated and unobtrusive, contained 2 miniature coffins, inside which were 2 mummified fetuses, both probably female, of about 5 and 7 months gestation. Great care had been lavished on these tiny premature babies. It seemed probable that they were the children of Tutankhamun and his wife Ankhes-en-Amun, and in the case of the older baby, that the child had a spina bifida condition. The next season, 1927-8, was taken up with clearing the annex, another small storeroom, this time off the antechamber. It was to be a complex, nerve-wracking process, made worse by the tomb robbers of antiquity who seemed to have ransacked the place. The work proceeded steadily and methodically, but at some cost to Carter's health. Working in the confined space of the tomb for so long was to mean that he was seldom well again for the rest of his life. By the 1930 season, when Carter returned to the tomb, his moods were beginning to get more volatile and depressed, and the incessant physical strain was beginning to show in a series of heavy colds. He was even beginning to get officious and short with the workforce, which was unusual for him because ever since he came to Egypt, he got on better with the workforce than almost anyone else in the community of archaeologists, and they'd repaid his loyalty with theirs through thick and thin. But now he could write bitterly. It seems to me they get more stupid as they get older, and slacker too, having been perhaps too long with me. His notes and diaries at the time are full of other complaints as well, about Egyptian officials breathing down his neck, about the fact that the tomb was now officially open for 3 days a week to tourists, and about the sheer hard grind of the work. The period of discovery was over. The period of routine conservation work was going to last for 2 more years. As a visitor to the tomb in 1930 wrote, "I do pity him cooped up for 7 years in the electrified darkness of that tomb."
The end was near. Carter's work on Tut's tomb was drawing to a close, but how would Carter follow the project of a lifetime? Life after Tutankhamun, when we continue.
I will build a motor car for the great multitude, constructed of the best materials by the best men and women to be hired. Any person making a good salary will be able to own one and enjoy, with his family, the blessings of hours of pleasure in God's great open spaces.
Recently, Easy Spirit created a revolutionary new shoe. And with comfort like this, who could stop at just one? The Surprise Collection. The most comfortable Easy Spirit ever now has some company. The new Easy Spirit. Unusually comfortable.
I remember the first time I met my sister's fiancé.
It's a great little place you got here.
He was intelligent.
Naturally, I became a neurosurgeon.
He was charming.
To eternal beauty, may it illuminate your hearts forever.
He was really starting to bug me. And I felt like telling my sister that this guy was not a bad guy, really.
Here's to each and every day. Sutter home.
They were staunch defenders of their faith, controversial, fearless, committed, revered. Biography explores their life stories, from their humble beginnings and their remarkable rise to power, to how the world came to embrace their extraordinary vision. Brigham Young, Billy Graham, Joan of Arc, Jesus of Nazareth. Power of Faith Week on Biography. All this week, only on A&E.
His name was Bernard Goetz.
I wanted to kill those guys, I wanted to maim those guys, I wanted to make them suffer in every way I could.
Was he a vigilante or a victim fighting back?
You have a right to self-defense in this country.
Who has the right to be judge, jury, and executioner?
If the police would have did something about it, we wouldn't have had to do nothing.
Is it justice or simply murder? American Justice. Wednesday at 9 Eastern, 10 Pacific on A&E.
AT&T now offers you the only program with savings on all kinds of calls, no matter where you make them or who you make them to. No competitor single plan offers this broader reach. Introducing AT&T True Reach Savings. You'll save on every type of call on your AT&T phone bill to anyone, anywhere in the U.S. Sign up and save 25% every time you spend just $25 a month. True Reach. That's your true choice. AT&T.
In February of 1932, 10 years after his discovery of the tomb, Howard Carter's colossal task finally came to an end. Without the support and expertise of the Metropolitan Museum and the scientific skills of Alfred Lucas, it could never have been done at all.
Carter was by now the most famous archaeologist in the world, thanks to the newspapers and to his 3-volume story of the discovery of the tomb. But he never managed to write or even start the detailed scholarly report which everyone expected of him. Somehow, when the physical work was done, his heart was no longer in it. The pace of his life changed dramatically. He'd spend days on his own here at Castle Carter. Sometimes he'd cross the Nile to the Winter Palace Hotel and sit by himself in the entrance hall, deep in thought. He would buttonhole passers-by like the ancient mariner with stories of better times. By now, he was a sick man diagnosed as suffering from Hodgkin's disease, a form of cancer. Even painting and the natural world failed to excite or console him anymore, and Egypt had long since lost its romance for him. With less and less reason to visit Luxor and the Valley of the Kings, Howard Carter eventually came back to England and settled in a large London apartment here at Albert Court, South Kensington, overlooking the Royal Albert Hall. From this late Victorian building, he operated as a gentleman dealer, buying and selling Oriental carpets and ancient Egyptian antiquities, with some success, judging by the rows he had with the Inland Revenue. Although there were rumours of close personal attachments with a Frenchwoman living in King's Cross, or was it Norfolk, with a young man from West London, or was it the Valley of the Kings, Carter, in fact, lived here alone. And there's no conclusive evidence for any close association, male or female, throughout his life. He seems to have been the sort of person who was much better at making friends rather than keeping them, and he even kept his distance from his own family. All that is, except his brother William and his sister Amy, whose only child Phyllis became a very special favourite during his final years. His life revolved around the grill room at the Hyde Park Hotel, where he usually dined alone, his favourite clubs, the Chelsea Arts Club, the Savile and the Arts Club, and fashionable dinner parties or country house weekends, where he entertained the guests with well-honed tales of Tutankhamun. By early 1939, Howard Carter's failing health required the attentions of a full-time nurse. Phyllis, too, looked in regularly, but the end was approaching fast. He died here in his Albert Court apartment on March the 2nd, 1939, after a painful and miserable illness. Shortly before he died, he'd recorded one of his lectures for the BBC. It's the only known evidence of what his voice sounded like. All trace of a regional accent, the Carter background, had by now been thoroughly wiped out.
33 centuries had passed since human feet last trod the floor on which we stood, and yet the signs of recent life were around us. A blackened lamp, a half-filled bowl of mortar. We had penetrated 2 chambers, but when we came to a golden shrine with doors closed and sealed, we realized that we were in the presence of the dead king. I suppose most excavators would confess to a feeling of awe when they break into a tomb closed and sealed by pious hands so many centuries ago.
When Howard Carter died in 1939, his funeral couldn't have been further removed from the pomp and splendor of the ancient Egyptian funerals he had discovered so much about. Not a single senior Egyptologist, museum curator, or government official came to see him off. But in the public eye, Howard Carter remained the most famous archaeologist of them all.
Now you can own this special collector's edition box set, King Tut, The Face of Tutankhamun. Order now, and you will also receive this exclusive Tut Viewer's Guide, plus this full-sized frameable poster. Call 1-800-423-1212, and for $79.95 plus shipping and handling, you will receive the poster, the guide, and the 4-video box set, King Tut. This special offer is not available in stores.
Get ready for a double dose of mystery. Sherlock Holmes and Lovejoy find out who done it tomorrow on the Monday Night Mysteries. Now, the insanity defense. It's sometimes a criminal's last hope for freedom. We'll find out how the fascinating field of psychiatric forensics can make or break a case on an all-new crime science. Next on A&E. It's time well spent.
Presenting the no-fee Ford Citibank card. With every purchase, you get an amazing 5% Ford rebate that grows toward the purchase or red carpet lease of a new Ford or Lincoln Mercury, like an Explorer, a Continental, or even a Mustang. Which means you can save big and really knock down your monthly car payment. All with the superior services of Citibank. Call 1-800-374-7777 for the no-fee Ford Citibank card.
I was worried I needed surgery for my hemorrhoids. I was itching and the burning was so painful. But my doctor said they weren't serious, I didn't need surgery, and use Preparation H. She specifically said Preparation H by name. Preparation H is so gentle it soothes and protects. It helps shrink swelling of tissues and relieves itching, irritation, and painful burning of hemorrhoids for hours. I feel great. I'm glad I trusted Preparation H. More people trust doctor-recommended Preparation H.
Is the insanity plea a last defense or last resort? Who is responsible for the crime? And is the science of forensic psychiatry fact or science fiction? Learn the truth of the last defense and all new crime science only on Voyages. Next only on A&E.
Hello, I'm Roger Mudd. Did you know that after 10,000 years, history has finally found a home on the History Channel? And yesterday never looked better, thanks to the best documentaries, movies, and mini-series that history has to offer. For all of history, all in one place, call your cable operator and make sure you're getting the History Channel.
Special presentation, Dogs. Next Sunday, only on A&E.
It takes an average person about 33 minutes to run a 5K race. In the same amount of time, 11 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer. Race for a reason. Race for the cure. Race for the Cure is not just about running or walking. It's about fighting breast cancer. Proceeds from each race fund research, education, and mammography screening programs. All it takes is a few miles and a few dollars. Sign up to run or walk in the Race for the Cure, Sunday, October 15th at Husky Stadium.
I'm somebody. Have you thought about that when you're building this highway thing? Have you thought about me? Government, bureaucratic corporations, they're all alike, telling us what's right. Maybe that's what's wrong. You cable guys seem to march to a different drummer. Will your answers be better? Because this is for us. This is our chance. Don't blow it.
Defenders of their faith. Controversial, fearless, committed, revered. Biography explores their life stories, from their humble beginnings and their remarkable rise to power, to how the world came to embrace their extraordinary vision. Brigham Young, Billy Graham, Joan of Arc, Jesus of Nazareth. Power of Faith Week on Biography. All this week, only on A&E.
Voyage into cyberspace, bionic worlds, secrets of the universe. This week, A&E Voyages takes you on a journey into crime science.
was driving along on Oilfield Road, or Levee Road, and a gentleman stepped out of a car and flagged me down and asked me if I'd push him out. And then his companion pulled a gun on me, and everything started from there on. He said, "You see the girl in the trunk?" And he said, "She's a dead bitch." And he told her to turn around, and she turned around, and he shot her right there. She fell back down in the trunk, and he closed the lid.
The girl that I shot was an object. She was not a girl. I was trying to create silence. This girl was screaming, the gun was pointing in this direction, and I pulled the trigger. This is how the girl got killed.
Really fast. It was exciting to be somewhere where I wasn't supposed to be. The frailty of her, you know. I was surprised at how easily she went. And then she just stopped. She just stopped moving.
What defense can there be for an act of murder? Sometimes in a murder trial, the defense lawyers are faced with overwhelming evidence of guilt. Then the last resort may be to try to persuade the jury that the killer was insane and not responsible for his actions. This film follows two such cases and the complex game which develops as lawyers, doctors, and psychiatrists play for a man's life. Lawyer and psychologist Professor Nigel Walker has been playing the game for more than 40 years.
There is a very long tradition behind our modern practice of not inflicting punishment on the mentally disordered for their crimes. It goes back at least as far as the 13th century in England, and in fact much further back in Roman law. Recently, the whole thing has become much more complicated by the notion of diminished responsibility, which means being partially responsible for the killing.
If a jury believes that the accused is fully responsible at the time of the crime, then they must convict him of murder. But if the defense can raise doubt about the killer's responsibility, the charge can be lowered to manslaughter. But to be successful, the defense lawyers need the help of science. They need the testimony of a forensic psychiatrist that their client was mentally impaired at the time of the killing. In this case, the accused man is played by an actor, but the psychiatrists and lawyers are playing themselves. Lucy Scott Moncrief, the defendant's solicitor or lawyer, wants to go for manslaughter and develops a strategy with the trial attorney, Stephen Kamlish, who will argue the case in court. They've had their client assessed by two psychiatrists, Dr. John Wilkins on the left and Dr. David Somick.
Occasionally, you're on your own in a murder case, but by and large, most solicitors will want to instruct two experts, if only because it gives them additional, if you like, weaponry in the adversarial fight in court.
The lawyers are searching for a defense for Sammy. He has a history of stealing women's clothing. When he was arrested after breaking into the house of a female neighbor, he immediately confessed to killing her. The post-mortem revealed that she had been assaulted and then suffocated to death.
Well, Lucy and I have discussed the psychiatric angle in this case and whether or not a defence of diminished responsibility is workable. But perhaps you'd just like to take us through your report or the main points.
The first thing is to establish whether or not there's evidence of an abnormality of mind. And in this particular individual, we have a lifelong history of behavioural abnormality, problems as a child, which have lasted throughout his life. Have you ever had a girlfriend?
Yeah, I met a girl at a party when I was 16.
Who started the contact between you and her? Was it her or was it you?
No, it was her.
She approached you?
She approached me, yeah.
In Sammy's case, it's pretty obvious that as there was a sexual component in the offence he's charged with, to ask him about his psychosexual development. Can you remember when you started masturbating, what sort of fantasies you had? You know, what sort of things came into your mind when you were masturbating? Do you remember when you were that age?
Naked women, you know.
Just like stuff out of girly magazines and that?
Yeah.
You never had any sort of homosexual fantasies?
No.
About men doing things or anything like that?
No.
It didn't come into it at all?
Just the shoes.
What about shoes? Tell me about that.
Well, and they just turn me on, you know? And the feel of the shoes.
Right.
I just felt a bit depressed, you know?
Talking to a man weeks, months after his crime gives psychiatrists a tremendously difficult job. The man may have had legal advice about what he should or should not say to the psychiatrist. He may have a confused memory. It may be like trying to find out from somebody what they dreamt about last night. And in the face of all those difficulties, the psychiatrist has to try and reconstruct what passed through another man's mind days, weeks, months before, in a way that would be rather difficult, even with a sane person.
When you realised you weren't on your own, you were simply sort of moseying around the bedroom, just
touching things, picking up. She had this like powder puff thing, and I remember picking it up and smelling it. And
it was like an old-fashioned kind of thing.
Yeah. Then she must have heard me because she came into the room. I couldn't believe that she was in there. I was so sure there was no one in that house.
So what happened next?
Then I pushed her on the bed, and she sort of fell on the bed.
But you mean you meant to push her onto the bed? Or?
No. And then I got excited, you know.
What, you mean like sexually excited? Yeah. Okay. So there was this sexual excitement then, and then what?
And then she started screaming. And it freaked me out a bit, you know. So I sort of put my hand over her mouth and her nose like that. And just thought, stop making any noise. I don't want you to make any noise.
And, I mean, have you any idea how long that went on for?
No, I don't know.
Well, I think this is a case where he's never matured in important aspects of himself and his sexual development.
What Sammy's lawyers really need is a clear medical diagnosis.
Like a lot of people with personality disorder, he has developed a depressive illness. He has, a little more unusually, a fetish or a paraphilia, and this has led to a homicide in the context of a burglary.
The emotional development of a person has gone wrong somehow. One's dealing with personality disorder, which in itself is a psychological entity that isn't well understood by the lay public. One could say it's not that well understood by some psychiatrists. They don't want to understand it because they prefer to deal with straightforward illnesses.
It's a difficult diagnosis to make, and it's a controversial diagnosis to make sometimes. And it's certainly true that a lot of psychiatrists would say that it's impossible to describe a personality disorder, but I know one when I see one.
But will the medical diagnosis be enough for Sammy's lawyers? The legal maneuvering is just beginning. Because the issue that concerns the law is not psychiatric illness, but responsibility.
Now, responsibility is a very interesting notion. First of all, it's not a psychiatric notion at all. It's a legal notion. Responsibility isn't something like dyslexia or low intelligence. It's not a skill or a faculty. To be responsible, to be fully responsible, is to have no excuse for what you did.
Crime Science will return in a moment here on A&E.
What lets you learn about the world in a whole new way? The Intel Pentium processor. It has the power to make PC software come alive with the sights and sounds that take you there, wherever there happens to be. The Intel Pentium processor.
It's just like a dream you can't hold in your hands. Taurus stole your heart once, it'll steal it again.
Ford introduces the all-new Taurus.
It's a dream within reach, and it's you at your best. Taurus, making the dream come true for you. Making the dream come true.
Investment advice and periodic dental exams. Two instances where relying on your own skills instead of calling on a professional could prove painful. Alliance Capital encourages investors to visit a financial advisor to help make mutual funds manageable.
I don't know.
About $500 a year.
How much do you spend every year on long distance? $400 or $500. Really?
It's horrendous.
How'd you like to get some of that back? Wait, what?
Are you kidding?
Just get Sprint Cents. Now, on top of 10 cents a minute, you'll get cash back every year you're with Sprint. The more you call, the more you get back.
Give me some money. Give me some money back.
It pays to stay with Sprint.
Of course, you aren't getting anything back unless you call Sprint first.
Call for 10 cents a minute evenings and weekends. Now with cash back.
And now, back to Crime Science. In Texas, Roger DeGarmo, an inmate on death row, is looking for an excuse he hopes that science can provide.
If you can demonstrate with science that someone really isn't 100% responsible for their behavior, then they certainly shouldn't be held to the last drop of punishment, you know.
This is a .38 caliber snub-nosed revolver. It's the pistol that Roger DeGarmo used to murder Kimberly Ann Strickler 15 years ago. He was described by a psychiatrist as a sociopath. A sociopath is a person who has no regard for the rights of anyone else or society. When he wants something, he takes it, and to heck with the consequences.
But it is one thing to be sentenced to death, another to have that sentence carried out.
And good evening, friends. A federal judge in Houston has blocked tonight's scheduled execution of condemned killer Roger DeGarmo.
DeGarmo, who's known as the Animal, was convicted in 1979 for the murder of Kimberly Ann Strickler in Fort Bend County. DeGarmo will now remain on death row until a review of his case is completed.
DeGarmo had already spent nearly 6 years on death row when his case was taken up by civil rights lawyer Greg Gladden.
I went to see him in 1985 and talked to him for about 2 or 2.5 hours. He probably did most of the talking, but I was really very aggressive trying to get him to let me represent him, not because I liked him or because his life was worth saving, but because I didn't believe that my tax money and my state